One must feel the spirit and poetry of the dunes if he deals with them as an artist who would send their story into the world. Earl Reed.
It was the fact this was a place still largely undeveloped, and artists and writers often love such places, and then they read into this landscape, brought to it their experience, and then recovered its history, its individuality, and thereby helped to create a civic culture that then has been the vehicle by which so many of us over the years have advocated for its preservation.
Trying to write briefly about Carl Sandburg, said a friend of the poet, is like trying to picture the Grand Canyon in one black and white snapshot. Carl Sandburg was born in Galesburg, Illinois, in 1878, to a poor family of Swedish immigrants. His father could not write his own name, but he would become the People's Poet of America. Known for his free verse poems that portrayed industrial America, he used the language of the people to express what he saw.
Smoke of the fields in spring is one. Smoke of the leaves in autumn another. Smoke of a steel mill roof or a battleship funnel. They all go up in a line with the smokestack, or they twist in the slow twist of the wind. Smoke and Steel, Carl Sandburg.
While he was fascinated with the raw grit of the industrial landscape, he would also use his poetry to describe the rare natural beauty he found in the Indiana dunes.
The dunes are to the Midwest what the Grand Canyon is to Arizona and Yosemite is to California. They constitute a signature of time and eternity. Once lost, the loss would be irrevocable.
Those words, spoken by America's poet laureate Carl Sandburg, would help to define a region.
And that's what the shifting sands are. They are evolution on the landscape, constantly moving, constantly changing, but yet showing eternal patterns of life in the course of that change. So Sandburg was deeply wedded to this landscape, and we found a voice of a character, of ability to express what he found here.
Carl Sandburg would be just one of many artists to define this region through various media. Over 100 years ago, a young painter by the name of Frank Dudley ventured into the dunes landscape to express it to the world with the stroke of his brush. His words would express his life's work.
I believe the artist, through his study and close contact with the landscape, is enabled to see more and feel more the joyous messages of nature, and that his real mission in life should be to interpret and reveal these truths that all may see and experience the same emotional reactions as does the artist himself, Frank Dudley.
He was so passionate about those dunes that he used his art as a form of communication to spread appreciation and love for such a natural beauty and natural landscape.
Dudley's passion for painting would win him the prestigious Logan Award from the Art Institute of Chicago. He would use the proceeds from this award to build a studio in the Indiana dunes. His rent would be a painting a year, donated to the state of Indiana. The region's beauty would attract other artists who would migrate across the state line from Chicago and find a home in the Indiana Dunes. Hazel and Vin Hennell were both artists and activists. For a time, they lived in the Chicago settlement house started by Jane Addams, known as Hull House, where they ran the pottery kilns. Eventually, they would find a home in the Indiana Dunes, where they would paint both the natural and cultural heritage of the region through what they found in the landscape and the working class people of the mills. Vin Hennell's work would express both the raw grit of the steel mills and the ecology of life that was born here.
He was trying to express that he had found the embodiment of life right here in the dunes, an unmistakable tree of life.
Many of these artists were graduates of the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, including a Romanian immigrant named Emil Arman, described by the Chicago Evening Post as perhaps the most finely sensitized artist in Chicago, with the soul of a peasant and poet and the mind of a philosopher. Arman would leave us with his own vibrant vision of the dunes.
So one artist after another, Arman, Hennell, Dudley, they all were trying to communicate what they found here, and in so doing, they also defined the place. So we, just to a large degree, continue to see the dunes through their eyes.
Another group of artists would use the landscape itself as their canvas. Pageants were often held in the dunes, and 1917 saw a production on the grandest scale. A pageant entitled The Dunes Under Four Flags used a big dune blowout as a massive natural amphitheater.
The pageant was a very, very ambitious effort. The principal reason was to publicize the possibility of a national park here. And this would bring people from Chicago out here to see the dunes. But the purpose went well beyond that. It was to direct the historical development of this Midwestern community. They took the history. In the background were the Native Americans, who of course had lived here, the Potawatomi, and had been displaced largely. But they were figures who formed the context for the whole pageant. And then the efforts of French colonialists, Spanish colonialists, British, and then finally American, all struggling for possession of this place. They wanted to show that history. What then should be the future history of it? They had this crazy notion that people should live here in community with one another, in peace with one another, and with the landscape. And that needed a great ideal. And that ideal was the community they displayed right there in the pageant. They had 1,000 participants, choirs, historical figures, and dancers who took the form of the waves of Lake Michigan, of the plants and the animals and the birds, so that they made it clear this was the total world that was now in front of them of this place. And the question was whether that, the energy of life, would be used to the benefit of life or for the exclusive use of a few to dominate others. And so that pageant, in effect, founded a community of persons who then became dedicated to that overarching vision. People through then the 20s working for the state park, all the way through into the 60s and 70s when people as little girls and boys went to that pageant.
In the past, many artists used their work to communicate the importance of preserving the shoreline. Today, the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore is repaying the favor through an Artist-in-Residence program. For over 15 years, the program offers artists the opportunity to live along the lakeshore for 2 weeks in exchange for one piece of art created during their stay. One local artist, Barbara Spies-Labus, captures the beauty of the region often as a means to educate people about its unique natural communities. The area's industrial heritage also influences today's artists. Just across the state line in Illinois, painter and sculptor Roman Villarreal draws inspiration from the remnants of U.S. Steel's old Southworks site.
I went to work here in 67. I was 17 years old. 311. I worked there till I got drafted. I want to catch the different points of the one wall. I'm going to use one wall only, one wall, but in this one wall, I'm going to try to incorporate different views of the same wall. It's really interesting because I don't think there's a view like this in the whole city of Chicago.
I was born in the Indiana Dunes. I grew up on the east side of Miller on a dune, and I've lived my whole life here. And as a child, I could walk a couple blocks to the beach. The national park was right across the street. I think of the dunes as being the most figurative landscape that I know of. It just has a very striking beauty. But when you walk down to the beach, you can see the industry on both ends. If you look to the west, you can see U.S. Steel, and if you look to the east, you can see Bethlehem Steel. And so this kind of dramatic contrast defined my work. The kind of art that I produce is referred to as woodcut. It's a type of printmaking where you carve a block of wood and you carve an image into a block of wood with chisels and gouges, and then you take a roller and you roll ink on the surface of the wood and you print it like a big stamp. So this right here is would be kind of a steel mill with smokestacks, and here are some tanks. As you move into the more industrial areas, you see a lot of tanks that are holding oil or other industrial chemicals. You can see the train line in here. In the background is the lake. You can see the lake, and it's all kind of this mess of industry and nature and houses all kind of coming together to create this area that we live in.